His last wish before execution, to see his dog, and the ending. Left everyone in tears. What would you ask for if you knew the world was counting down your final hours? A meal, a last phone call, maybe a whispered goodbye. But for one man, condemned and forgotten, his only request was heartbreakingly simple: to see his dog one last time. It sounds small, insignificant. But what unfolded next wasn't just a farewell between a man and his loyal friend. It was the unraveling of a secret so explosive it stopped a life from being erased and forced an entire city to confront a truth they tried to bury. This is not a story about crime. This is not a story about pity. This is a story about love, about loyalty, about how even in the darkest corners light can break through in the most unexpected ways. Stay with us, because the ending will stay with you. He was hours away from execution. His only wish to see his dog one last time. But what happened next didn't just save a life. It exposed a secret so explosive it shook an entire city. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about survival. It's about the kind of love and truth that refuses to die. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. The gray light of dawn barely touched the cold walls of Raven Hill Correctional Facility, the kind of place where time seemed to slow and every second stretched out into a lifetime. The building loomed like a forgotten monument on the outskirts of New Orleans, its cracked stone facade weathered by storms and sorrow. Inside, the morning was no different than any other except for one man. Elias Monroe Hale sat on the narrow steel frame bed of Cell 17, staring at the tiny slit of a window high above him. He hadn't slept, not really. He'd spent the night counting the tiles on the floor, feeling the heavy weight of iron chains around his ankles and wrists. In a few short hours, Elias Monroe was scheduled to die. No family waiting, no crowd of mourners, just a final march down a sterile hallway toward a needle that would end everything. But Elias Monroe had made one last desperate request, something so unusual the warden had paused when reading it aloud. "I want to see Luna before I go." Luna wasn't a woman, wasn't even a human. She was a dog, a golden retriever with soft ears and a heart bigger than any prison could contain. Elias Monroe had rescued her from a flooded ditch 3 years before everything went wrong. Back when life still offered second chances, most final requests were meals, a favorite song, a chance to speak to a chaplain. Not this, a dog. A glimpse of something pure before the darkness closed in. Victoria Hale, a stern woman hardened by years in the system, wasn't sure what to make of it. Animals weren't permitted in the high-security wing, let alone near the death chamber. But something about the quiet dignity of Elias Monroe, request gnawed at her, refused to let her dismiss it. Through the grim corridors of Raven Hill, the guards murmured about it too. Some said it was touching, others said it was pathetic, but no one said it didn't matter. Somehow it mattered more than any last meal ever had. Elias Monroe shifted on the bed, the chains clinking softly. His hands, once strong from construction work, now trembled faintly. Not from fear of death, but from fear he would leave this world unseen, unheard, unloved. Luna was the only creature who had ever looked at him without judgment, without suspicion. When the world branded him a criminal, a monster, Luna had just wagged her tail and licked his hands. A sharp knock at the door jolted him. Ryan Porter, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent frown, entered without ceremony. In his hand, a clipboard. "Time to prep," Craig said gruffly. Though his voice lacked the usual bite, there was something softer in the way he avoided Elias Monroe's eyes. something almost guilty. Elias Monroe stood the shackles pulling at him and extended his wrists for the cuffs, routine dehumanizing necessary. Craig hesitated. "The warden's still checking on your request." Elias Monroe nodded once. No illusions. The odds were slim. Bureaucracy didn't bend easily, not even for dying men. As he was led down the corridor, every sound seemed amplified. The shuffle of other inmates stirring, the distant slam of a gate, the metallic screech of a food cart. The facility felt alive in a different way today, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Passing the visitation room, Elias Monroe caught a glimpse of sunlight for the first time in days. A golden shard piercing the grime-smeared window. It hurt his eyes. Funny, he thought. They were about to take his life, but it was the light that wounded him most. Down a hall painted an institutional beige, so faded it was almost gray. They brought him to the final holding cell, the death watch cell. Clean, clinical, suffocating. Inside a plain cot, a table bolted to the floor and a Bible left carelessly at the edge of the table. No clock. They didn't want the condemned counting minutes, but Elias Monroe could feel them, each one slicing closer to the end. Craig left him there, locking the door with a heavy clunk. Elias Monroe sat down, staring at nothing. No visitors, no second chances, just the slow, inevitable ticking of fate. He thought about Luna, her lopsided run when she was excited, the way she snored like a freight train when she slept on his couch. Would she even remember him after 3 years? Would she be scared, confused by the cold smell of prison and the strangers in uniform? Maybe it was better if she didn't come. Maybe seeing her only to lose her again within minutes would be the cruelest cut of all. He bowed his head, pressing his shackled hands together. No prayers, just memories. A life reduced to a handful of scenes. A childhood spent dodging fists. A youth lost in bad neighborhoods. A single act that had destroyed everything. And a dog who had loved him anyway. Outside, the cell voices rose. Tense, urgent. He caught only fragments, cleared it with the board. Rebecca Stanton office said, "Under exceptional circumstances, but if it goes wrong." His heart thudded painfully. He didn't dare hope. Not yet. Finally, footsteps approached. Warden Briggs appeared, her face unreadable. Flanked by 2 guards, she held a folded piece of paper in her hand, the official seal visible even at a distance. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice measured. "We've approved your request." For a moment, Elias Monroe couldn't process the words. Approved. Luna was coming. Tears he hadn't known he still possessed burned behind his eyes. He blinked rapidly, forcing them down. There would be time for that later, if there was any later left. Briggs continued, "Your dog is on her way. Miss Harper Lane, your former fiancée, is bringing her. She should arrive within the hour. You'll have 15 minutes supervised contact." Then the sentence trailed off. No need to explain what came next. Elias Monroe nodded, unable to speak. His chest ashed. Not from fear, not from sorrow, but from a surge of gratitude so fierce almost shattered him. He wasn't dead yet. And somehow in this broken place, mercy had found a crack to slip through. As Briggs turned to leave, Elias Monroe whispered almost too softly to hear, "Thank you." She paused, her back still to him, and said, "Don't waste it." The door clanged shut. Alone again, Elias Monroe sank to the cot, overwhelmed. Luna was coming. In the middle of all this darkness, a single golden thread still connected him to life. He stared at the door, willing it to open. Time was a monster now, clawing at him with every heartbeat. But he held on to one thought with desperate clarity. If Luna still remembered him, if her eyes still lit up when she saw him, it would mean he hadn't been erased from the world. Not entirely. And for Elias, Monroe Hale condemned, but not yet defeated, that was a kind of salvation worth everything. Everything. Outside the heavy gates of Raven Hill Correctional Facility, the world moved faster than Elias Monroe Hale could have imagined. Harper Lane gripped the steering wheel of her battered blue pickup, her heart hammering against her ribs as she raced down the rural Louisiana highway. The early morning mist clung to the fields on either side, turning the road into a narrow gray ribbon stretched out toward the horizon. In the seat beside her, Luna sat upright, ears perked, her golden coat gleaming even under the dim sky. The dog seemed to understand that something urgent was happening, though she couldn't possibly know just how much hung in the balance. Every time Harper Lane glanced over, she caught Luna's wide, expectant eyes looking back at her as if to say, "I'm ready. Take me to him." The warden's voice still rang in Harper Lane's ears from the phone call an hour ago. "You have 90 minutes to get here, Ms. Brooks, or the request will be void. No room for traffic, no margin for delays, just a small, nearly impossible window that might be Elias Monroe, last chance for a real goodbye." The irony was brutal. For 3 years, Elias Monroe had clung to Luna in his mind like a lifeline. And now, when fate finally relented, everything came down to the ticking of a clock and the stubbornness of an old truck. Harper Lane pressed harder on the accelerator. She didn't know if Elias Monroe was guilty or innocent in the eyes of the law. She didn't care anymore. What she knew was that once he had rescued a frightened, shivering dog from certain death. What she knew was that Luna had never loved anyone the way she loved Elias Monroe Hale. That kind of truth didn't need a courtroom. Behind her, a siren wailed. Harper Lane's stomach flipped in terror. She slowed just enough to let the state trooper pass her hands, trembling slightly. She whispered a prayer under her breath, not knowing who she was praying to anymore. Maybe just to time itself, or mercy. As the miles blurred beneath the tires, Harper Lane remembered the night Elias Monroe had been arrested. The disbelief in his face, the way he kept asking, "What's happening? There's been a mistake." She had believed him then, even when the newspapers had not. Even when neighbors had pulled their children away from her on the street. Even when her job offers dried up and her life slowly shrank. And now, after everything, all that remained was this one drive, this one moment. A green highway sign loomed ahead. Raven Hill exit 12. 15 minutes, maybe less. Harper Lane reached over and stroked Luna's head. "Almost there, girl," she said, her voice cracking. Luna's tail thumped once against the seat in reply. Meanwhile, back at Raven Hill, Elias Monroe sat rigid on the narrow cot, straining to hear every sound from beyond his cell door. His mind spun useless circles. What if something happened? What if Luna didn't make it? What if this tiny, impossible hope was about to slip away? After all, Ryan Porter returned his steps slower this time, his face grimmer. He unlocked the small hatch in the door and slid in a bottle of water. Elias Monroe didn't move. "Nothing yet," Craig said almost gently. Elias Monroe nodded stiffly. He felt like a man balanced on the edge of a crumbling cliff, gripping the air, waiting for a hand that might never come. Inside the administrative wing, Warden Briggs paced her office, checking her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. She had bent more rules this morning than in her entire 20-year career combined, and if Harper Lane didn't arrive in time, it would all have been for nothing. Briggs thought of Elias Monroe's face when she told him the request was approved. It was not the face of a man who feared death. It was the face of a man starving for one last glimpse of something pure. She didn't know if he deserved mercy, but she knew he deserved that. The clock on the wall read 7:48 a.m. The execution was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. Every moment felt like a gavel slamming down. Harper Lane barreled off the exit ramp, the truck groaning under the strain. The guard station rose into view, encased in chain-link fences and razor wire. 2 uniformed officers waved her down. She rolled to a stop, throwing the door open before the engine had fully died. "I'm here for Elias Monroe Hale," she gasped, fumbling for the warden's paperwork, her voice shrill with urgency. "This is Luna. Please, we're here." The officers exchanged a glance, then one of them grabbed a walkie-talkie. A tense exchange crackled through the static, then a curt nod. "Go ahead," the taller guard said. Gate 3 parked by the intake office. Harper Lane jumped back into the truck, tears pricking her eyes. Luna barked, once sharp and eager, sensing the change. Inside, Briggs received the update and allowed herself a rare smile. She turned to Craig. "Tell Mr. Hale they're here." When Elias Monroe heard the words, he slumped forward, his face in his hands. Relief cracked open something inside him, something deeper than grief, deeper than fear. He hadn't been forgotten after all. 5 minutes later, the heavy lock on his cell clicked open. Craig gestured him out. "Come on, Hale," he said quietly. "She's waiting." Elias Monroe rose on legs that barely felt strong enough to hold him. His heart thundered painfully in his chest. But for the first time in years, it was not with dread. He was about to see Luna. Hope, fragile, reckless, unstoppable, roared to life inside him. And for the first time since the sentence had been passed, Elias Monroe Hale truly believed that maybe, just maybe, something was about to change. As Elias Monroe followed Officer Holloway down the sterile corridor, a strange tension crackled in the air, heavy and restless like a thunderstorm that refused to break. His footsteps echoed against the concrete walls, a hollow sound that made each step feel like a countdown. In a side hallway branching off from the administrative wing, he caught sight of a familiar blur of gold and wagging tail through a small window. Luna. He almost stumbled. His throat closed up with the effort to hold back the surge of emotion roaring inside him. She was here. She was real. Harper Lane had made it in time. For the first time in 5 years, he allowed himself a real, unguarded smile. But then, just as Holloway reached for the door leading to the visitation room, another voice called out sharply, "Hold up!" The officer froze. Elias Monroe turned, his heart dropping into his stomach. From the shadows near the security checkpoint, a figure stepped forward. Older, broad-shouldered, dressed in a plain gray suit that hung a little too heavily on his frame, as though weighed down by something far more crushing than gravity. The man removed his hat, revealing graying hair and sharp eyes, rimmed with exhaustion. Elias Monroe blinked. He recognized him, though it took a moment for the memory to slot into place. Henry Calloway, the very man who had arrested him. "What's he doing here?" Elias Monroe whispered, his body tensing automatically. Warden Briggs, following behind, answered quietly. "He requested to speak to you. He claims he has something urgent to say, something you deserve to hear." Elias Monroe stared at the detective. He felt the sudden savage urge to refuse to walk past him without a glance straight into Luna's waiting arms. But some instinct deeper than anger made him pause. 5 years ago, his world shattered in the span of a few signatures and a jury's nod. Maybe, just maybe, part of the truth still lay tangled in those ruins. Elias Monroe nodded stiffly. The warden gestured, and Holloway led Luna and Harper Lane to a separate holding room for the moment. Elias Monroe's heart twisted painfully as he watched Luna's tail wagging, her body straining toward him, confused at being pulled away. "Just a few more minutes," he promised silently. "Just a little longer." He turned back to Samuel Briggs. The detective looked like he hadn't slept in days. His voice, when it came, was raw and stripped of the authority it once carried. "Elias Monroe, I owe you something I should have given you years ago." Elias Monroe crossed his arms over his chest, every muscle taut. "Spare me the regrets." Briggs flinched. Good. Let him feel it. But then the older man straightened, determination flashing behind his tired eyes. "I didn't come here for absolution," Briggs said. "I came to tell you the truth. You were right. You didn't kill Daniel Mercer." Elias Monroe stared at him, the words hitting like a punch to the gut. "There were things the department buried, things I was ordered to ignore. Witness statements that didn't align with the narrative they wanted. Financial ties between Vance and some very powerful people in Baton Rouge who wanted him silenced before he could testify about laundering money through city contracts. Briggs's voice shook with the weight of his admission. You were convenient. You were the easy choice. Elias Monroe's hands curled into fists. I lost everything because of you. I know, Briggs said, voice thick. I let it happen. I thought I was doing my job. I thought if I stayed silent, maybe it would be someone else's problem. I was wrong. I failed you. For a long moment, Elias Monroe said nothing. Rage, disbelief, grief, all wearing inside him. He thought of the sleepless nights, the endless court appeals, the way he'd clung to Luna's memory just to keep breathing. Now here was the man who could have stopped it and hadn't. Why now? Elias Monroe finally asked, voice low. Briggs's face twisted in pain. Because my conscience finally outweighed my cowardice, and because I learned this morning that new evidence is coming to light Harper Lane. She's been working with a private investigator. They found records, hidden payoffs, security footage that was never submitted into evidence. A judge agreed to review your case. The world tilted. Elias Monroe grabbed the edge of a table to steady himself. The warden has requested a temporary stay of execution pending the review, Briggs added, eyes pleading. You might still have a future, Elias Monroe. A real one. But it's going to take everything you've got left to fight for it. A future. The word tasted foreign in Elias Monroe's mouth, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Behind him, the door cracked open slightly. He heard a soft whine. Luna impatient, hopeful. Elias Monroe drew in a shaking breath. Forgiveness wasn't something he could offer Briggs. Not today. Maybe not ever. But the truth. The truth was something. It was a beginning. Without another word, Elias Monroe turned his back on the detective and walked toward the sound of Luna's whine toward Harper Lane's quiet, steady presence toward the only pieces of his life that had never betrayed him. As Holloway unlocked the door, as Luna hurled herself into Elias Monroe. Arms with uncontained joy, the walls Elias Monroe had built around his heart cracked wide open. Samuel Briggs watched from the hallway, shoulders bowed under the crushing weight of too-late repentance, and whispered to no one in particular, I'm sorry. The apology floated through the air like ash falling at Elias Monroe's feet, but never quite reaching him. There would be time for justice, time for redemption, perhaps. But for now, there was only this moment. A man, his dog, and a future fighting to be born from the ashes of everything that had been stolen. The minutes after Luna leapt into his arms felt strangely suspended in time, like a movie reel that had frayed and slipped from its track. Elias Monroe buried his face into the thick golden fur, inhaling the familiar grounding scent of home, of better days of freedom. Luna whimpered softly, licking his jawline as if reassuring herself that he was real, that they were real. Together again after 1,000 broken days, Harper Lane sat across the room, hands clasped tightly on her lap, her smile trembling at the edges. Officer Holloway gave them a respectful distance, standing guard by the door, but not intruding on the fragile miracle unfolding inside the visitation room. Through the narrow window, late morning light filtered in, casting thin stripes across the cement floor, making everything look both impossibly vivid and painfully fragile. Elias Monroe looked up, locking eyes with Harper Lane. Is it true? He asked, voice rough from too many unshed tears. They stopped it. Harper Lane rose and crossed the room in 3 strides, crouching in front of him and Luna. Her hands found his still trembling, still cold, and she squeezed them hard. They've issued a stay, she whispered, voice catching. Not a full pardon. Not yet, but enough to stop what was about to happen. Enough to give you a fighting chance. He closed his eyes, fighting a dizzying wave of emotion. Relief, fear, anger, disbelief. They all tangled into a knot inside his chest. But they could still. He couldn't finish the sentence. Harper Lane nodded gravely. They could. It's not over. It's just paused. The weight of those words pressed down on him like an invisible hand. He wasn't free. Not yet. He was floating somewhere between life and death, tethered by thin hope and the sheer stubbornness of the people who refused to let him disappear without a fight. Warden Briggs entered quietly, clipboard in hand, his stern face unreadable. He nodded to Elias Monroe before addressing Holloway. "Take Mr. Elias Monroe to holding room 3, he said. "He'll wait there until we receive final confirmation from the governor's office." Elias Monroe rose to his feet, Luna following close her head, nudging his knee protectively. He turned to Harper Lane. "Will you stay?" he asked. She nodded, tears brimming. "As long as it takes." As Holloway led them through the labyrinth of hallways again, Elias Monroe kept his gaze locked forward, trying to keep the creeping dread at bay. It wasn't the same desperate march toward death he had faced that morning, but it wasn't freedom either. It was something worse in some ways, a limbo where hope dangled just out of reach, daring him to believe and fear at the same time. Holding room 3 was smaller, colder than his previous cell, but at least it had a real chair, a small table, and a window that cracked open just enough to smell the sharp tang of the late autumn air. Holloway allowed Luna to stay, a small mercy Elias Monroe would never forget. For the next few hours, the world shrank to that tiny room. Elias Monroe sat with Luna at his feet, his fingers threading absent-mindedly through her fur, grounding himself in the present moment, because the future was too uncertain and the past too painful. Harper Lane visited intermittently, bringing news fragments of updates from her investigator from legal aides, scrambling to assemble new evidence into a coherent, undeniable case. They found security footage from a gas station 2 blocks from the scene. She said during one visit, her cheeks flushed with hope. "You weren't there. Someone else was." Later, she returned again, a new glint in her eyes. A former employee of the mayor's office came forward. He said, "Vance had enemies bigger than we knew. They paid for your silence." Each piece was a thread tugging Elias Monroe closer to salvation. Yet none alone was enough. Not yet. The hours stretched a taut rope, fraying strand by strand. Holloway brought sandwiches neither he nor Elias Monroe could stomach. Luna, oblivious to the tension, devoured her share with enthusiastic slurping, offering a moment of laughter that felt almost criminal in the grim setting. Outside the window, the sky deepened into twilight, the horizon bruised with purple and gold. Elias Monroe leaned his forehead against the cool glass, watching the birds wheel across the dimming sky. So close so far. Then, just as darkness fully settled, Warden Briggs reappeared, accompanied by a woman in a tailored navy suit, a representative from the governor's office. The room seemed to shrink. "Elias Monroe," the woman said, formally consulting the folder in her hand. "In light of new evidence and credible allegations of investigative misconduct, the governor's office has issued an emergency injunction to halt your execution, indefinitely pending a full review of your case." Indefinitely. The word rattled through Elias Monroe's mind like a loose coin in a tin cup. "You're not a free man yet," she added, "but you are no longer scheduled for execution." Elias Monroe sagged back into his chair, feeling as if his body might simply dissolve from the weight of relief. Luna, sensing the shift, jumped up, planting her paws on his lap and licking his face furiously. He laughed, a raw, incredulous sound that startled even him. Harper Lane rushed in behind the official's eyes shining. "I told you," she whispered fiercely, grabbing his hand. "I told you we weren't giving up." Tears blurred his vision. He didn't care anymore about the room full of strangers. He pulled Harper Lane into a hug, Luna squirming happily between them, and let the tears fall soaking into her shoulder. In that small, stark room of steel and concrete, the impossible had happened. The clock had stopped. For the first time in years, Elias Monroe's life was no longer slipping through an hourglass. It was at long last his to fight for. When Elias Monroe finally walked out of Raven Hill Correctional Facility, the morning air hit him like a tidal wave. Fresh, sharp, almost too alive for someone who had grown accustomed to the sterile, deadened breath of confinement, he stepped beyond the gate, slowly, Luna straining gently against her leash beside him, tail wagging in wide, joyful arcs. Harper Lane hovered just a step behind, giving him space, but never letting the silent support between them falter. There were no cheering crowds, no television cameras, just the muted gold of the early sun stretching over the worn concrete parking lot, and the heavy, heavy feeling that something irreversibly precious had been returned to him. The state had not officially cleared his name yet. That fight was still to come, buried in courtrooms and paperwork, and headlines he had no desire to see. But for now, Elias Monroe was a free man, conditionally, quietly, and above all, gratefully. As they climbed into Harper Lane's battered old pickup truck, Elias Monroe couldn't stop glancing around as if the world itself might vanish if he didn't memorize every detail. The cracked sidewalk, the sagging telephone wires, the smell of gasoline and wet grass. All of it vibrated with the kind of beauty he hadn't let himself hope for in years. They drove in silence for a while, Luna nestled between them, occasionally nosing Elias Monroe's hand as if to double-check that he was still real. Finally, Harper Lane broke the stillness. "I kept the house," she said. "I didn't know if you'd ever see it again, but I couldn't let it go." Elias Monroe turned to her, his voice soft. "I'm glad you didn't." When they reached the modest bungalow perched near the hills overlooking Asheville's Blue Ridge landscape, Elias Monroe felt a lump rise in his throat. He remembered every crack in the driveway, every squeaky hinge on the front gate. Yet somehow it all felt new, too touched by the miracle of second chances. Inside, Harper Lane had tried to prepare. A fresh set of clothes lay folded on the bed. The kitchen gleamed. A new dog bed waited in the corner for Luna, who immediately sniffed it and curled up with a satisfied grunt. Elias Monroe wandered through the small house like a man stepping through a dream. The pictures on the wall caught him by surprise. Old snapshots of them smiling at barbecues, hiking through the Smokies, and playing fetch with Luna in the backyard. Harper Lane hadn't erased him from this life, even when the world demanded it. She had carried him in her heart through the unthinkable. Later, as he sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of strong coffee, Harper Lane joined him, the quiet between them thick with unspoken emotions. "You don't have to figure everything out right now," she said gently. "We'll take it slow." Elias Monroe nodded. For the first time in years there was time, precious, unhurried time, no ticking clock, no death sentence looming overhead. Over the following weeks they built a fragile rhythm. Elias Monroe attended therapy sessions arranged by advocacy groups, sitting in sterile rooms with other exonerated men who spoke of sleepless nights of anger they didn't know where to place, of a future they weren't sure they deserved. He listened more than he spoke, letting their words break open spaces inside him he hadn't realized were locked tight. Luna became his anchor. Morning walks through the misty hills turned into afternoon games of fetch at the park. Children flocked to the gentle golden retriever, and through their wide, innocent eyes, Elias Monroe glimpsed something pure again, a world that hadn't been completely corrupted. Harper Lane stood by him through it all, a steadfast presence who never once treated him like he was broken. When the official apology from the governor's office finally arrived, Elias Monroe held the letter in his hands, feeling its weight and its emptiness. No formal document could undo the years lost. The night spent praying for a tomorrow he thought he'd never see. But it was something, a beginning. Offers came in. Book deals, interviews, public speaking engagements. Elias Monroe turned them all down. He didn't want to become a symbol or a cautionary tale. He wanted simply to live. He volunteered at animal shelters, finding joy in training abandoned dogs, helping them find new homes, just as Luna had once helped save him. Each time he knelt beside a nervous, trembling puppy, coaxing it into trust, he healed another invisible piece of himself. One evening, months after his release, Elias Monroe and Harper Lane sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the world in strokes of fire and gold. "Do you ever wonder why you survived?" Harper Lane asked softly. Elias Monroe thought about it for a long time, listening to the crickets tuning up for their nightly symphony. "I used to think survival was punishment," he said slowly. "Now I think it's a gift. Not everyone gets a second chance. I intend to make mine count." She reached over and took his hand, her touch warm and steady. "You already have." As the stars began to prick the darkening sky, Luna rested her head on Elias Monroe's knee, sighing in contentment. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elias Monroe wasn't running from the past or bracing for the end. He was home. He was whole. And the future, once a terrifying void, stretched out before him, wide, and waiting full of possibilities he no longer feared to hope for. Elias Monroe's journey was never meant to be ordinary. From the sterile, hopeless corridors of Raven Hill Correctional Facility to the open, wild embrace of freedom, his story is one of quiet resilience, fierce love, and the unyielding pursuit of truth against a world all too willing to forget him. What began as a final request, an innocent plea to see his loyal dog Luna one last time before his scheduled execution, unfolded into a harrowing race against time that revealed corruption, exposed hidden allies, and reignited hope when all seemed lost. Elias Monroe was a man abandoned by the system, buried under accusations he had fought tirelessly to refute. In those final hours, when every second ticked toward an irreversible fate, it was love, not rage, that fueled the fight for justice. Harper Lane, his fiancée, who never lost faith. Luna, the loyal companion whose very existence symbolized unconditional love, and an unexpected confession from a guilt-ridden detective. These became the fragile threads that rewove the tapestry of Elias Monroe's life. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about reclaiming his humanity. Each step after his release from quiet mornings spent retraining abandoned dogs to awkward first conversations with strangers who only knew his story through headlines, was an act of quiet defiance against a system that tried to strip him of hope. Elias Monroe didn't choose vengeance. He chose restoration. He chose to heal not only himself, but the broken spaces in the lives of others who, like him, had once been unseen. Through his struggle, we learned that survival is not simply a matter of luck. It's a deliberate act of courage. It's the decision to keep loving, keep trusting, and keep believing when the world hands you every reason not to. Elias Monroe. Story teaches us that freedom isn't given. It's seized by the hands and hearts of those brave enough to hope beyond reason. The lesson is clear. In a world that sometimes feels cold, indifferent, or unjust, the true revolution is maintaining your humanity. It's standing up when you're expected to stay silent. It's choosing compassion in the face of cruelty. And most importantly, it's understanding that the worth of a person is never determined by the darkest chapter of their life. In our own lives, this lesson invites us to look closer at those around us who are fighting battles we cannot see. It calls us to advocate for justice, to hold space for those wrongly judged, and to offer grace to others and to ourselves when the burden of living feels too heavy. It reminds us that second chances aren't just rare gifts for the lucky few. They are essential rights every human deserves. So whenever you find yourself questioning whether your voice matters, remember Elias Monroe. Remember that a whisper of kindness can echo louder than 1,000 shouts of hatred. And remember that you too have the power to change someone's life sometimes just by refusing to look away. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the strength hidden within compassion, please subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels our mission to bring more stories like Elias Monroe to light. Stories that celebrate resilience, redemption, and the incredible power of everyday humanity. Subscribe now and join us on the next journey. Because sometimes the most life-changing stories are the ones we least expect. Elias Munro's story isn't just about a man, a dog, and a prison. It's about the fight for dignity when the world has already written your ending. It's a reminder that sometimes justice only finds its way through those who refuse to stop believing, even when the odds are suffocating. At Soulful Stories 4, we believe stories like this aren't just meant to be watched. They're meant to be remembered. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about redemption, second chances, or even the quiet power of loyalty, let us know. Hit that like button to support voices that deserve to be heard. Drop a comment below. Do you think one act of compassion, like letting a man see his dog, can change the course of justice? Or was this simply a delay of the inevitable, your opinion matters? And if you believe in the kind of storytelling that puts humanity first, subscribe to Soulful Stories of 4. Together we give light to stories that others might let fade. One more question to leave you with: was Elias saved because of new evidence? Or because public sympathy suddenly made him worthy of a second-look justice, or pressure, redemption, or convenience? That's a conversation worth having. Thank you for staying till the end. Remember, the stories we choose to amplify shape the world we live in. Don't underestimate the power of listening. See you in the next chapter.